Sweet memories. That's what Toastmaster Mark Ahlers has when he recalls a speech that he delivered to his law partners exactly 1 year ago today. This morning, Mark shares that speech as he presents Connect with Your Audience, which is a project from the Presentation Mastery Pack. The speech is titled, The Realization. Please welcome distinguished Toastmaster, Mark Ahlers.
All right.
It's been 6 months now since they drilled a couple of holes in my head. If it's okay with you, I'll share some of that experience with you and let you know how I'm doing. When reviewing my CAT scan, the emergency room doctor discerned the problem and said surgery is necessary immediately. When I began to ask a few questions, he said the neurosurgeon will answer all your questions when you get upstairs. When I arrived at the operating room, the nurse immediately began inserting a PICC line in my right arm and then inserted another one in my left wrist. She then handed me a consent form and asked me to sign it. As I began to read it, the neurosurgeon strolled in. He was a short, young guy with thick glasses and long hair. Without even introducing himself, he pulled out a black magic marker and marked an X on my forehead, where he planned to drill one of 2 holes in my head. Before he had a chance to mark the second X, I handed him the consent form. I said, "Doc, before I sign this, I have a few questions." He was a little perturbed that I had interrupted his handiwork on my head, but he finally stepped back and said, "Okay, what do you got?" I said, "Doc, what caused this problem?" He said, "It's usually caused by trauma to the head. Did you bump your head, or were you in a car accident the past couple of weeks?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, sometimes the trauma can be very subtle and you might not remember it." I said, "Well then, Doc, what will happen if I don't have this surgery?" He said, "Well, if the bleeding continues, it will likely cause a stroke, major paralysis, and then death." I said, "Okay then, Doc, what if I do have this surgery? What's the worst that can happen?" He thought about it for a moment and then said, "Probably the same thing. Major paralysis and then death." Then I looked him straight in the eye and said, "What do you think will happen?" Without hesitating, he said, "As soon as we drill the holes in your head, it will relieve the pressure and the stroke-like symptoms will disappear. We'll also insert a drain in your head to allow the excess fluid to escape. After about a week, we'll remove the drain and send you home. If you take things easy, you should be back to normal in about 6 months." Well, it's been 6 months now, and I'm happy to report that I'm feeling back to normal. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. But there's just one problem. You see, while I was lying in that hospital bed for 7 days, I had a lot of time to think. And from that quiet space, I realized that the bleeding in my head was not caused by trauma, but rather was God's way of getting my attention so I could focus on where I was in my life and where I should head. After 7 days of contemplation, 2 things became clear. First, if I continue with the full-time practice of law, you guys will eventually have to carry me out of here in a body bag. I certainly don't want that for you or for me either. Second, and more importantly, I understood that God's future plans for me did not include the full-time practice of law. Although I don't know exactly what God's plan is yet, I feel compelled to pursue it. So it's time for me to transition to a new path. My hope is that we can work out a mutually beneficial transition. But no matter what happens, I thank you for being such great partners and, more importantly, such great friends. So, fellow Toastmasters and guests, if your mind works anything like mine, you're probably thinking, interesting story, Mark, but what's your point? Well, my point is, I'm grateful. Grateful that God spared me from a stroke, major paralysis, and death. Grateful that my law partners have allowed me to transition to a part-time path. Grateful for all the support I've received from you. Particularly grateful to Toastmaster John Nucitelli for stopping by my office to check up on me. With the right half of my head still shaved from the surgery and 2 rows of surgical staples still embedded in my scalp, I looked like a cross between Frankenstein and a concentration camp survivor. Despite my appearance, grateful that John was sympathetic and said, I've seen worse. I just can't remember when. Although I wasn't allowed to drive after the surgery, grateful that John stopped by on Friday to drive me to lunch with the guys. Grateful that John forewarned the others of my garish appearance because the others acted like nothing had happened. Grateful that Tom Luis apparently didn't get John's memo because when he showed up, he eyeballed me carefully and then effortlessly evicted the elephant from the room when he said, dude, what happened? Finally, grateful to you, my fellow Toastmasters, for helping me develop the ability to share these breakfast moments and for providing me with this sacred space to do so. Madam Toastmaster.